I hope you all had a wonderful morning. Was it exciting? And I hope you had a good ride back here. Tulsi, can we get started? Okay, thank you. So welcome to the third track in the Nilgiri Economic Dialogue. And here we are going to unravel a very important theme, which is around sustainability. I think most of us are familiar with the 17 SDGs and how these 17 SDGs actually helps the entire world, even though, like yesterday we heard from Mr. Arun Maira, each country is on its own path to meet the holistic sustainable development goals. I think the most important aspect that we want to unravel in this session is about the challenges India has in front of it with respect to impact of climate change and why is sustainability increasingly becoming important to each individuals, to companies, and of course to the entire livelihood, because the impact of climate change is quite alarming. How many of you in this room believe the world leaders are doing enough to keep the temperature rise limited to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century? Please raise your hands. How many of you believe in this entire hall believe that the world leaders are doing enough to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees before the turn of the century? I can't see any hands up. Oh, that's pretty difficult question, looks like, yeah? Okay, let me flip this differently. How many of you believe the Nilgiri biosphere is protected or it is getting to a situation we cannot control now? How many of you believe that we have done the right things to preserve Nilgiri biosphere? And are we on the right track to preserve the Nilgiri biosphere? Long way to go. Okay. But I can tell you, I asked one of the ecological experts on Nilgiri biosphere. I think it's getting worse. So I think this is why this session is going to be very, very important actually. But before I invite Padu, I want to get some contextual background to decarbonization. And connection to that is in the climate change. So when you look at the world's GDP, I think 2024, roughly we are about $110 trillion. And based on the predictions that was made in the climate agreement in Paris, there was a pathway that was set for decarbonization. And that was really looking at deploying lots of new technologies, lots of renewable energy being pumped in, new discovery of batteries, disrupting the mobility, and many other things were planned out of it. But one of the biggest challenges that we see is, while the world is racing to fix climate change, we are seeing a disruption of climate change impacting the livelihood of people. Basis the estimates published by the International Energy Agency last year, the world lost 3.5% of its GDP due to climate impact. The world is growing at 3%, but it is losing 3.5% in terms of climate change impact actually. The second important data point, I know Mr. Arun Maira is not here, but data is also important. If you look at the cost of doing this big shift on decarbonization, we are talking about 3 to 3.5% of the world's GDP is the capital that we require to decarbonize this world. Just some rough estimates actually. The ratios may be different on developed countries to countries which are like India, you know. Now, given the cost of doing this and the time we have to make some strategic choices as a nation. Of course, we have an ambitious plan on mobility. We have an ambitious plan on, making the buildings more greener and many other things. The cost of doing and the speed of doing is making the cost even higher, right? And the most ironic thing about decarbonization is, in order to become net zero, we still do not have technologies that will help us to get net zero even by 2050. Which means we have to really innovate a lot more technologies, especially in the industries which are emitting higher, like steel, cement, mining, and many of these industries. So holistically putting this picture in a nutshell, the challenge in front of us is very complex, but there is some light at the end of this tunnel, they say. There's one underlying opportunity which has immense unleashing potential to help us become more efficient as an economy. And there is where we believe energy efficiency will become an important lever for us, because in our way of saying it is, energy efficiency is really the first fuel. And I think one of the biggest opportunity that we have in front of us is how can we as a community really deliver on doubling of energy efficiency, because this is the energy we waste today. And this is the energy that has been available for us in front of our eyes, but we are letting it go. So now we move on to Padu. Padu comes with a lot of experience on energy efficiency. And I'm going to turn it to Padu to make his opening comments on energy efficiency and why energy efficiency is an important lever to sustainability and also helps us in moving towards the path of decarbonization. So after you come in, I will come up with a few more questions, Padu.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank the Nilgiris group as well as CII and you in particular for having invited me here. I'll pick up from your comments, the last remark you made, that energy efficiency is the first fuel. There's enough evidence now, be it in India or be it in any of the other developing or developed countries, that more energy has been saved through energy efficiency than has been generated through oil, coal, or nuclear, or even renewables, or certainly renewables. In fact, the World Bank, whom I'm working for, did this analysis about 8 to 10 years ago and found that energy efficiency actually is saving more energy than what renewable generation is generating into the grid. And IEA looked at 11 of the 17 countries and came to the same conclusion. So energy efficiency certainly is the first fuel. Also, and this directly comes to your question, Ravi, that again, studies in the short to medium terms have indicated that if you have to meet your decarbonization goals on a global basis, then 60 to 70% of your decarbonization goals in the short to medium terms can be met through energy efficiency. And in particular, in India, energy efficiency can meet 40 to 45% of our decarbonization targets. Nothing else comes even close. Neither does renewables, or neither does carbon capture and storage, or neither does material efficiency. So energy efficiency is right up there. But the question is, if energy efficiency can deliver such important goals, then why isn't it happening at scale? And why isn't it being adopted as a serious strategic option by the government? If you really watch the treatment that energy efficiency has received, then you'll understand that if energy efficiency is seen more as an embellishment what the Americans call as motherhood and apple pie. You know, they love motherhood and apple pie. They would talk reams about it, but not give it sufficient importance, not giving it a seat on the table. Last week, Ravi, I was in Delhi and I was asked this provocative question: what should be the institutions in India do to advance energy efficiency? In other words, what should the government do? And my answer, it was a glib answer, is that you need a funeral before a revival. You just need to now start afresh and reimagine energy efficiency. What does reimagining energy efficiency mean? And how long would it take to reimagine energy efficiency? The interesting thing about energy efficiency, we'll pause for a moment, unlike, let's say, renewables, where it is oftentimes compared to, and people say there are two sides of the same coin. See, renewables is resource constrained. Today, there's a lot of sun, you'll get a lot of solar power. If there's a cloud over the sun, that's it. Your solar power will diminish. Same thing about wind. As long as the wind is blowing, you'll get wind energy and wind power. But the moment the wind stops, clearly your windmills will not function. But that's not the case with the energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is limited by your imagination. Energy efficiency will always be there wherever there's any economic activity. So energy efficiency really is a people's movement. Yes, if you look at statistics, and if you look at the decarbonization targets that we have to achieve, then industry has to step up to the plate. Industry in India consumes almost about 45% of the total energy consumed. It could go up to 50% in another 5 to 8 years. And 50% of the energy consumed in Indian industry is consumed in 5 industries, 5 industrial sectors: steel, cement, petrochemicals, fertilizers, and process industry. And these industries are not particularly very energy efficient, excepting for cement. For a variety of reasons, cement has been able to be not only leaders in India, obviously they are among the cement industries, but they're leaders in the world. Their energy intensity, that is the amount of energy they consume per ton of cement or clinker produced, is probably the least. Ton of cement, it will be the most. So cement industry is definitely efficient. But the other sectors, such as steel consumes 50 to 100% more energy than the best technology available. Refineries and petrochemicals consume 30 to 40% more energy than what happens, let's say, in the US or Japan. So clearly, these industries have to step up to the plate, and there are ways in which one can involve them. Now, just changing the subject a little from the statistics, I'm kind of covering a wide spectrum here, Ravi, because you kind of asked me an open-ended question. The first question that Ravi asked you all, are you all concerned about climate change? Are you sure, people are confident that countries will meet the 1.5 degrees aspirational target? And many of you all felt no. And the reason is that the message on climate change has always been an environmental message. Now, when you make it an environmental message, then people are immune to it. We have heard enough about, the world coming to an end, then apocalypse happening in the next 15, 20 years, and so on and so forth, that climate change is an existential crisis, that people have become immune to it. So when you talk about it, people go to sleep. They just tune off. And this is true not only in audiences here, but all over the world, because they've been hearing this for the last 15, 20 years. But there's something else that you could talk about, which will make climate change very exciting, very interesting, and will make you react in a much more positive way. And that is the business opportunities that strategies to mitigate climate change provide. That is the value that efficiency could bring to the table. It's that value in terms of business opportunities, in terms of industrial growth, in terms of productivity, and so on and so forth, and I can elaborate on each one of these, that's important. So let me stop here. Ravi, I think I've given you some ammunition for you to now start asking me some more provocative questions.
Yeah, I think last night we heard a lot about capital productivity. I think as a country, we still have some work to do on improving the energy productivity. But I'm going to ask a question to the audience before I come back to Padu. I think there was an exciting session yesterday on data centers. Today, India is hosting roughly about 1.5 gigawatts of data centers. And they are predominantly in 6 to 7 cities of India. And we are seeing an increasing momentum in creation of a lot more data centers. And I think I was talking to one of the data center CEOs. He says, right now my job is to create. I'm not going to worry about operating cost. But the underlying challenge in data centers, a 1.5 gigawatt data center requires to be powered by 1.5 gigawatt of energy. This is the big energy guzzler. We spoke a lot about AI yesterday. Artificial intelligence is another big problem for decarbonization. How are we going to disrupt this, Padu?
That's, I've also read about these statistics, and it's also being bandied about, in the US press too, that data centers themselves are major energy guzzlers. And in the US, I know that as a statistic, there's something like 50 gigawatts of power would be used in the next 3 years just in data centers. Now the question is, if artificial intelligence is now going to play a role in advancing decarbonization, then we have to look at these artificial intelligence in a very strategic way and in particular areas where the impact will be the greatest. Now, the impact to my mind of artificial intelligence is in the management of both supply and demand sides of the energy equation in a utility. Now, currently what happens in a utility, you have big power projects, coal-fired, and so on and so forth. And they are on the supply side, and then they work with a kind of a digital connection, but not much of a digital connection. There's a divide by supplying power in traditional ways to end users. Now, can we couple both ends, the supply and demand, so that they are integrated as an integrated energy network? So what does an integrated energy network do? An integrated energy network basically enables customers and utilities to work together in partnership, and I'll tell you how that is done. It'll enable a number of supply-side technologies, particularly renewables, solar, wind, grid renewables, on the coal side, high efficiency, ultra supercritical technologies which are less emitting and so on, will get the supply side to come together under a AI algorithm which would be very, very sensitive to the fluctuations in demand by moderating demand through a series of sensors and controllers. So essentially what you have here is a digital network which will operate sensors and controllers and enable supply to meet the balancing load required through optimizing both renewables as well as conventional power. Now, this whole integrated energy network has to have a backbone. It has to have intelligence, and it'll be AI which will provide the backbone and the intelligence. Now, why I mention this is the extent to which such architecture can then start making an impact on decarbonization goals will be enormous in India. Recognize that 72% of our power generation today is through the thermal route and largely coal. And that is the largest source of CO2 emissions. If we can bring that down, let's say, to another 25% less or 50% less, then that would make a huge impact on us meeting our decarbonization goals. It cannot be done under the conventional system of power generation supply that we are seeing in our state LCD boards and so on. They'll have to have an integrated energy network. And that will make it much more intelligent. That will also make it much more resilient and have all these advantages. And one last point, and I just mentioned it in passing. On the demand side, there is a huge opportunity for customers and utilities to work in partnership. There is a customer using electricity and power has an obligation to use the power as efficiently as possible. But they may not meet that obligation because the pricing may not be appropriate for them to be incentivized. But if one can work out a system of pricing, peak, off-peak tariffs, so that they operate their system during off-peak times, and in case of large customers, also give the freedom to the utility to control their load. Now, air conditioning load is going to be a huge in this country, and it's not going to be trivial. It's going to actually be about 30 gigawatts by 2030. Now, 30 gigawatts is out of our total generation of about 450 or 500 gigawatts, about 10 to 15%. The problem is it will all come together at the same time in the evening. So it'll have an evening peak. Now, if there's a way in which the utility, through this integrated energy network, can help control the operation of air conditioners in large industries, chillers, air conditioners in large industries, that will have a huge impact on reducing peak load. So a lot of these opportunities are possible under integrated energy network.
Thank you. I think I will flip this into another very important topic, lifestyles. How many of you watch Netflix? And have you watched a documentary called Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy? It was released very recently, and it's about Amazon. I think if you have not watched, please watch it. The reason why I'm asking this question is, Amazon has a fundamental marketing strategy where consumers end up buying more than what they need. And lifestyle is becoming an important challenge for sustainability. What are your take on that, Padu?
You know, I've thought a little bit on this, and there is a broader question here before I come to lifestyles. And that is, there's a difference between conservation and energy efficiency. We oftentimes confuse both. But conservation is doing without. Efficiency is being efficient in the use of energy. So the priority always has to be conservation, and efficiency follows. I'll give you a very simple example. If you're in a room and you leave the room, you switch off the lights, your energy consumption is zero. Energy efficiency is basically at work here because you're not consuming anything. It's most efficient. On the other hand, you can always say that I have an LED lamp which is very efficient. But the LED lamp also uses energy. Now, this is a very simple point, but you must take this point to the next level. Now, I talked to you about statistics about Indian industry, and they consume far more than what their counterparts abroad consume. The energy intensity is high. So the question is, and somebody did ask me this question last week when I was in Delhi, can India be competitive on climate change? Can India show, not competitive, sorry, can India show leadership on climate change? And certainly ours is a major country. We are the third largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. We'll become the second largest maybe in another 15, 20 years, but we are the third largest. It's first China, second the US, and India is third. Although on a per capita basis, we're very low. So being the third largest emitter of carbon dioxide, you have a responsibility. But how can we discharge that responsibility? Where can we show leadership? Can we show leadership in industrial energy efficiency? Well, it may be a bit of a stretch because we are far behind, as I mentioned. Can we show leadership in areas on energy supply efficiency? Not probably yet. It may happen in the long term, but in the short to medium terms, the next 10, 15 years, there's one area where we can show leadership, where we can truly be considered as the country to follow, and that is in lifestyle changes. See, as a society, ethical, moral, traditional, cultural, we have always been careful in our use of energy. We have always been frugal in our use of energy. We may have cases where there is some energy conspicuous use, but by and large we have been very, very frugal. We can turn it to our advantage. Why I say this is important is, in the United States and in Europe, more in the US than in Europe, there is now a feeling that they are wasting energy out of a sense of extravagance. There's a lot of extravagance. Wasting energy out of a sense of affluence, that they need to cut down on the use of energy. But they have not been schooled in the kind of thought process that we have unconsciously been schooled in. They don't know that they have to follow simple conservation habits and ethics. It may be surprising. In 1976, President Carter actually gave a talk. He called it the fireside talk. It was really the first fireside talk. Now everyone calls their talks fireside, there's no fire at all. I was on a fireside talk in Delhi the other day and there was no fire nearby. But it was a fireside talk in the White House with him wearing a cardigan, he was wearing a sweater. This was 1976 during the oil price hike. Basically, he was giving the message to the Americans that you need to conserve energy. You need to tighten your belt. You need to sacrifice. The reception he got was entirely the opposite of what he expected. People thought America did not become great by conserving its way to greatness. Conservation is not a strategy at all. The papers are full of negative comments about Carter. And in fact, they very strategically decided that they will now go in for energy efficiency through technology. And that was the emphasis right through. That certainly helped, but it has not solved the problem. Whereas we in India, at the same time, 1974-76, there was oil price hike here too. Our consumption was far, far less than that of the United States. If I recall, we consumed oil, which is about 15 million tons. Today it's 130 million tons, 150 million tons. So our consumption is very, very less. We probably consumed what they consumed in a week, we consumed in a year, that kind of a thing. But all our programs actually began with conservation as the heart of it. I was with an organization called PCRA those days, that's 1977, 74, 75, 76. And all our propaganda, all our media was all on how to save fuel by good driving habits, how to save fuel in the kitchen, big slogans talking about save fuel or walk to your destination, save fuel for patriotic reasons, whatever. But conservation has always been front and center in our mind. So, coming back to your question, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, 2 years back in I think COP26, or was it COP28, had actually declared the LIFE project, Lifestyle for the Environment. And there was some uptake, but not too much. And I think we need to redouble our efforts. India needs to now come out openly in various forums that it is willing to give assistance to countries all over the world in how to kind of design a conservation program just by following lifestyle habits and so on. So I think that will be our leadership. We have to contribute something in the global command of chain of command, and that's where we could, I think, really play a role.
Thank you, and I'll come to one last question before we open it up for the Q&A. This is a little controversial question. I think we have Dr. Here, but the question is about, is it time for institutional repositioning of Bureau of Energy Efficiency? The reason I'm asking this question is, I think when the country had the ambition to conserve energy, I think it was sometime in 1999, through a Parliament Act, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency Act was passed, and we have done some remarkable work on energy efficiency in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. But I think if you look at some successful countries like Philippines, like Thailand, by today there is a lot of interdepartmental play if you want to accelerate climate change, conservation, and many other aspects around sustainability. So the question is, when countries like Thailand and Philippines have institutionally repositioned conservation of energy and everything around energy under directly the Prime Minister's office or the President's office, is it right to put BE under Ministry of Power? What are your thoughts?
You know, I was asked this question the other day in Delhi in a fireside chat, and here was my response. See, I was sitting next to the Secretary, Ministry of Power, and I was ex-secretary rather, and Mr. Alok Kumar, a very articulate gentleman, and I asked him this question, and I said, Alok, if there were two people outside your office and both had their visiting cards sent to you through your office assistant, one is the head of a utility, let's say head of NTPC, and another is an energy service company, CEO of an energy service company, whom would you call for the meeting inside first? And Alok said immediately, I'll call the head of the utility first. And I said, exactly. You did the right thing. You are in the supply ministry. Why is energy efficiency in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in your ministry? It has no business to be in your ministry. And then Alok realized that he talked a little too soon. But what Alok said was right. See, what happens is when you have a department on energy efficiency in a supply side ministry, then you don't get the visibility, you don't get the funding, you don't get the importance, and you're always bypassed. Energy efficiency is not a supply matter. Energy efficiency is a resource in and by itself, no different from oil, coal, nuclear, etc. If it's a first fuel, and if the other fuels have their own ministry, why doesn't energy efficiency as the first fuel have its own ministry? So my answer to your question is the Bureau of Energy Efficiency certainly, without any delay, must be removed from the Ministry of Power and set up either as a separate ministry or set up under the Prime Minister's office. There is a second reason also for all of this. And that reason is, once you give importance to energy efficiency, as they gave importance to renewables. See, if you recall, way back in 73, 74, under Mrs. Gandhi's government, she helped set up the Commission on Additional Sources of Energy, which was really the precursor to Department of Non-Conventional Energy Sources, which came up 5 years later, and then which was the precursor to the Ministry of Renewable Energy, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. So renewable energy, despite the fact that it has not delivered as much as what energy efficiency has delivered, which has not created as much jobs as what energy efficiency has created directly or indirectly, gets a ministry, but here is a silent player whom no one has a part of, is grown on its own, and the direction it is getting is from a small department in a corner of an office in Shram Shakti Bhavan, where even the director of the department doesn't get an appointment with his own secretary as much as what, let's say, a chairman of NTPC would get. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So we ought to now very clearly give energy efficiency its a pride of place and the importance, and give it the kind of, center stage. Another reason also. There has never been, apart from the time in 2000 when the Bureau of Energy Efficiency was set up, and maybe a little later during the time when recently the Energy Conservation Building Code was adapted to include the word sustainability, was a bill passed on Parliament which has anything remotely connected with energy efficiency. There's never been a bill, there'll be a code, there's never been an act. There's never been a debate. No party in India, no political party in India has even talked about energy efficiency as part of the ideology. So given all of that, once you make it into a ministry with the budget and the support and the funding and with the right thing, then energy efficiency will start moving center stage. So a long answer to your short question, yes, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done by Parliament as soon as possible.
Thank you. Let me open it up for questions, but before I do that, I asked before coming to this session, one of the AI platform, Perplexity, can we save the Nilgiri biosphere, or is it too late? And the answer I got from is very interesting. It is too late to serve, to secure the Nilgiri biosphere for two reasons. One, we are seeing an increasing sanitary discharge to the wetlands. So sanitary management is one challenge. That's what the AI ChatGPT's equivalent of Perplexity is telling me. And the second, it tells me that there's a lot of invasive species like gorse, broom, and wattle that displaces indigenous grasslands. So I think it's time for us to think that speed is becoming very important to fix some of the sustainable challenges that is ahead of us. Now let me open it up for some Q&A. I think starting with Srivats and then the mic at the back, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just hold on. I think the mic is important for everybody to hear. Srivats, what do you want to ask?
Yeah, couple of questions. One is, if you look at, you're right in saying 72% of the power comes from thermal power, but a lot of the thermal power stations are old and are polluting significantly more than the relatively recent supercritical power stations. Should they be, if you're looking at climate change, should you have a end of life for some of them? Should there be something like that? That was one question. If you take the same thing and apply it to, say, cars or buses, should there be something where if you have an emission norm, maybe 3 generations back you can allow, but you should not allow more than that? Do you think this type of movement will actually make a big difference in terms of the emissions which are being released in our country?
Yes, there has been, in discussions, and not just discussion, there has also been some movement in the direction of retiring, accelerated retiring of power plants. The question is, removing a power plant, a coal-fired power plant, which is a base-loaded plant, is like removing a molar teeth. Unless and until you have a replacement, the system there, the stability of the grid would suffer. So removing a power plant ahead of its retirement age, assuming it's 30 years retirement, and after 20 years you think that its emissions are high and for environmental reasons you want to retire it, you are going to make an impact on the stability of the grid in that place. So it's not that simple a decision. But there's another reason also, and that is the retirement of a power plant is also connected with the retirement of coal mines, because these are dedicated coal mines which will no longer have to supply power to that power plant, and possibly they may not even supply coal to industry or anywhere else. So they may too also have to be retired. Now, closing down of a coal mine has severe socio-economic implications in the country. In India, many of our coal mines are in small towns and villages where the entire town, in one way or the other, is employed by the coal mine. Okay. Okay, I was getting into the just transition mode, but okay, I can come back to this. Retiring, it's again a question of economics. Having a supercritical power plant certainly would be a much better option than running a subcritical power plant whose heat rate is high and whose emissions are higher. It's just a question of economics. Finally, it boils down to that. But there's also this question of retiring a plant and using that particular plant and converting it into a renewable power plant. If that makes sense, and there's been cases where in a place where there is a lot of solar, one can put up a solar power plant in that place, in which case, one can certainly, think of that substitution. Or one don't have to retire the entire plant. You retire the boilers, keep the condensers, convert them into synchronous condensers, and they could act as grid stabilizers and play that role. The point I'm trying to make is every retirement has a painful side to it. And there's a human side to it, and one needs to consider that aspect of it. There's a technology side to it, and that certainly is important. So it's a fairly, complex issue.
Thank you. Sridhar?
Thanks a lot for your insight, sir. I'm just quoting a budget statement. The budget's proposal to allocate 20,000 crores for nuclear energy mission and engage the private sector to set up 5 local small modular reactors by 2033. Is that a good move on the way what you are speaking on energy efficiency or manufacturing?
Well, it's neither here nor there. You need to do both. I'm not anti-nuclear. I think there's a need to do that, but we have got to find equivalent, if not more, funding. See, the nuclear power plant, and I can tell you without knowing the numbers, would cost you at least 12 to 15,000 crores per megawatt. Now, coal is about 8 to 9,000, and I think nuclear would be clearly double. Efficiency is 1/15 to 1/10. So I could actually generate an equivalent megawatt of power through efficiency. I won't call it megawatt, I call it negawatt. I could save an equivalent negawatt of power at 1/15 the cost and get it implemented in quick time without any pollution, without any carbon emissions, without any demand on our resources. See, it's not only coal that our coal-fired power plants use. Water is getting to be a huge issue. Yeah. So it's also the water issue. Efficiency doesn't require water, it doesn't require coal. So keeping that in consideration, we come to a broader, kind of a policy decision. And I think that's important, and we have kind of not given it any importance, and that is integrated resource planning. See, what you do in utilities in Europe, in UK, and in the US, they look at both demand and supply, and then they see where is the cost-effective opportunity. That is, you don't look at a power plant in a sequential mode, that I put up a power plant, then I put up transmission, then I put up distribution, and then we supply power to consumers. Right from the beginning, I look at it in a parallel mode and say that if 1 rupee, if I'm going to put up in the power plant, can I get the same power by saving 1 rupee on transmission and distribution or in end use? And clearly, there's enough evidence to show that the 1 rupee will take you much further. But there's a challenge. I don't want to make everything sound hunky-dory. Putting up a power plant, and India has done a great job in it. See, we were 1.5 gigawatts, there's 1,500 megawatts in the year 1950. We are 450,000 megawatts today. So, by any stretch of imagination, we have done enormously well. We are the 5th largest power generator in the world. There's all been supply side. Supply side is built into our system. It's in our blood. We know how to add a power plant. How many people or institutions you need to take a decision to put up a power plant? You need the state government, you need the state utility, you need a coal supplier, you need a manufacturer like BHEL, and then you're in business. It takes 2 years or 3 years to set up a 1,000 megawatt power plant. Right? The systems are in place, the decision making is known, you get the money, you get it done. Now you want to save 1,000 megawatts of power. If you want to save 1,000 megawatts of power, the number of people you need to contact is enormous. Right from housewives to farmers to industrialists to municipal light operators. Literally every citizen in the country has to be involved. That's why it says the people's movement. Now to organize, to orchestrate a conservation program through this entire spectrum that I just mentioned is not easy. It's challenging, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. Thanks, Padu. And last question, and then we can.
Hello.
He's still available if you want to talk to him after that.
Mine is a double-barrel question. Maybe it's the effect of returning from the Madras Regimental Center. The first question is the possibility of using hydrogen as an alternative to prevent climate change, because some of the steel companies from Sweden have started using hydrogen to produce steel, but the cost is going to be going to double up or triple up. That's one thing. I want you to explain what are the possibilities of hydrogen being used as an alternative energy. And it is also said that there is going to be an indirect global warming effect of hydrogen. That's number one. And number two is Donald Trump's government is withdrawing a lot of subsidies for electrical vehicles, wind energy farms, so on and so forth. And they are also withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. How do you think this is going to reverberate across the world and slow down our progress in climate change management?
Okay, I'll keep it brief. See, hydrogen, there are 3 types of hydrogen. Black hydrogen, gray hydrogen, green hydrogen. Black is from coal. Gray hydrogen is also from oil and oil-related product, from gas rather, because it's not as polluting as the coal hydrogen. And then the third is green hydrogen, which is from renewables. So green hydrogen clearly meets our environmental standards, environmental guidelines, and certainly is not that, doesn't have any polluting effects. But the cost factor needs to be considered. We in India have been using hydrogen in industrial boilers and so on in caustic soda plants where hydrogen is in excess. And the use of hydrogen is not unknown in India. But still, you need to develop the pipelines to transmit hydrogen, the safety issues and so on. So it's not that easy. But I do see a role for hydrogen down the road. Green hydrogen may happen in 10, 15 years. Investments are beginning to happen, and clearly it's an important area. Your second question on Trump, this was not unexpected, it was expected. I was in Washington last month, and I had the opportunity to meet the head of the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, who's a very good friend of mine, and all the policies you talk about, which goes through the US House and Senate and which gets finally approved, are policies which come from this guy's office, Steve Nadell's office, and we had exactly this discussion. I told him, Steve, it's going to happen. And he says, yeah, Patu, it's going to happen, and we are just ready for it, but he's going to take out all the incentives. IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was on clean energy, and he's going to back off from all of that. It was expected, and it's not unsurprising. But the thing in the US is, while it may have some impact, many of the states are anyway going forward with their programs on renewables. Texas has a huge renewable energy program. Michigan has a huge energy efficiency program. California's energy efficiency program is priceless. It's a fantastic program. They'll go ahead with their programs. So domestically in the US, there may be some impact here and there, but it'll go on, business as usual. He did, and moving away from Paris Agreement, he did that in 2016. Only thing is their credibility gets lost. They can't come into meetings like this and talk about efficiency and things like that. I was working in AID, and AID has disappeared now. I worked for 15 years in AID, and now AID is no longer there. These are political things for whatever reason, but over the longer term, only time will tell whether they made sense or they didn't make sense.
Padu, before we wind up, the last question to you. How optimistic are you about India leading the world in decarbonization? A short answer.
Very optimistic. I think we can make it. I think by putting conservation as center stage as our strategy and working it through in all its details and getting it as a people's movement. You see, the United States, they're very good in project management on energy efficiency. Europe is also good, but more on the management side, more on the business side. India, we can make it into a people's movement. They don't have it as the people's movement yet. They think that technology will take them across. Up to a point, they're right, but it'll have to be a people's movement, and that's where we have an advantage. Yeah. So we could be leaders.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think on that positive note, there's a lot of optimism from what Padu's kind of closing the session, that like yesterday Arun talked about listen, learn, and he also gave an example of in the next Nilgiri dialogue we should have farmers, and we also need to have a larger part of the community as part of this. As long as you make energy efficiency as a people movement, we win. That's the conclusion from this session, and let's give Padu a very big applause for...
There's a personal point that before I began this session, I had a slide presentation of 30 slides, which I had kind of developed, and I was talking to Ravi, and Ravi said, hey, do you want to show these slides? Why don't we have it as a conversation? I think, Ravi, thank you very much. You did the...
I hope I didn't disrupt...
You did, no, you didn't disrupt it. In fact, you got my thinking going. But one last point which I wanted to make, because on a radical vision, if I can very quickly make that point, and that is, this is for the industrial audience, because that's what I thought most of you all are from, that energy efficiency, please remember, is a shop floor boiler room subject. Energy productivity is a boardroom subject. And the challenge for Indian industry is to move energy efficiency from the boiler room to energy productivity at the boardroom. And we can discuss, it's a subject in and by itself, but it's very, very important. So this is one of my very radical suggestions, that Indian industry has to step up to the plate. And that discussion hasn't happened in India yet. We have moved from fuel efficiency to energy efficiency to energy conservation and up to a point to decarbonization, but we have missed the energy productivity route. And we think we need to do that.
Thank you very much, Padu. I have to thank you for having taken time to come over here, and really appreciate your thoughts. Let's give Padu a big applause.